The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA. Critics are calling Thunderbolts one of the best Marvel movies of all time. Yeah! It begins a powerful new era.
That's what they talk about!
Rolling Stone calls it thrilling.
I should have seen this coming.
Funny and irreverent.
Thank you. We needed that.
And it must be seen in IMAX. Marvel Studios' Thunderbolts. Now playing. Rated PG-13. Some material may be inappropriate for children under 13.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik. This is your Friday pod. One more transfer portal themed thing before we move forward with some other stuff here. But this one, a little less about hypotheticals and more about looking at Ohio State's 2025 national championship run and if they can repeat as national champions, and some guys via the transfer portal who might be able to get in the way of that. Obviously, Stefan, this is a new day and age in college football where you look up and a guy's on one team and you look up again and he's on a whole nother team. Sometimes it can impact Ohio State and sometimes it can't impact Ohio State. So we wanted to run through guys. It's no number. It's just how many guys you think are intriguing that Ohio State might have to go against or might end up having to face at some point down the road in 2025 on its way to potentially repeating as a national champion. Stefan, I'm going to let you go first. Is Nico Iamaleava number one on your list?
He's on the list. I don't know if he's number one because I don't know if his arrival means that UCLA can beat Ohio State.
So who's number one? That's fun.
So number one on my list is someone that we maybe have mentioned on the pod recently, but someone I know we've texted each other about recently is wide receiver Trevor Pena. Or Trebor. Trebor. Pena. Transferred from Syracuse to Penn State, the receiver. So, why don't you choose? You're the host. Which route do you want to go first?
Let's go with Pena, because I feel like we've talked about Nico a lot, and that's more in theory than it is anything else. I think I like that route because you're talking about a team that's trying to win a national championship.
Yeah. So, here's my thing with Pena going to Penn State. First of all, I think he's an outstanding receiver. I think he had over 1,000 yards last year at Syracuse. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't over 1,000 yards, it was close to 1,000 yards. Obviously playing with McCord. He was probably, outside of Nico, the biggest name in the spring portal cycle to leave and go somewhere else, just in terms of at least proven production, because of how good he was at Syracuse. And I think the reason I point to him as this conversation centers around impacting Ohio State is that Penn State in this losing streak to Ohio State and kind of just throughout the James Franklin era defensively has been fine. There's been, bad games defensively, but for the most part has been okay. And I think throughout the James Franklin era, the Penn State defense has been okay. And you add in Jim Knowles and you're pretty confident in what that unit can do. Like you point to last year's game where Ohio State wins on a road against Penn State. I don't think either of us are saying Penn State lost that game because of their defense. Mm-hmm. And obviously Ohio State made a few blunders that helped out, and maybe they could have scored some more points, but the total was what the total was. Penn State's defense did enough to have them in that game. Consistently, the problem for Penn State against Ohio State has been their offense. And that's kind of been their Achilles heel, a lot of the times in big games. And it's, if you want to really hone in, it's the receiver play. Because we saw what their running backs can do, especially in that Big Ten championship game against Oregon. They get both those guys back. They get Drew Aller back. You can always trust Penn State's offensive line to be pretty decent, tight end play to be pretty decent, but they can't get receiver play right. They've tried bringing in guys like Julian Fleming, and it just hasn't worked. They just don't have the explosiveness, the playmaking ability on the outside and at receiver. Pena gives them some of that. And if that unlocks something in this offense, that is an element that they have not had against Ohio State before. Now, am I going to sit here and predict Penn State to beat Ohio State? No, I'm not going to do that because I don't trust James Franklin to do that, at least where we sit here recording on May 1st. But he's doing the thing that we said he has to do. They're doing the thing we said the Nittany Lions have to do. Go out and get some good receivers. And they didn't go out and get a Julian Fleming, a highly rated guy who was unproven. They went out and got a proven guy who did it in the ACC and did it against some pretty good defenses in the ACC. So if Penn State is going to do something offensively that can actually challenge some of the best teams in the country, and in our specific situation about this conversation, challenge Ohio State, they had to go out and get a guy like Pena, and they did that. Like I said, is that going to manifest into a win? We don't know. But you can't sit here and say Penn State never gets receivers, and then they go out and get a receiver, and then you diminish it. Like, it means something that they went out and they got Payne.
He led the ACC in catches last year. 84 catches for 941 yards and 9 touchdowns. Which, 84 catches and you only have 941 yards, that's kind of crazy. But, I mean, Emeka had 81 catches.
I was going to say, he's not far off Emeka's total.
No, he's not. I think he's a slot guy. But this is going to be his 6th year of college football. That's crazy. We're not out the window yet. There's six
not even. You kind of just see that now. You're just like, all right, moving on.
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh man, see, let me tell you why this is so beneficial to have a guy who's in his 6th year. I think, didn't Penn State not have a single receiver have a catch in the second half of their semifinal loss to Notre Dame?
Yeah, I believe it was something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So what if Drew Aller has a weapon? That's not just his time. Like a traditional receiving weapon. Tyler Warren was the receiving weapon. He had 104 catches last year for 1,233 yards and 8 touchdowns. But they also were using him all over the place. I get that. But we're saying, what if Drew Aller has a weapon on the outside who can challenge these corners a little bit? What if 3,327 yards for 24 touchdowns on 66.5 completion percentage and 8.4 yards per attempt? What if that's now 3,800 yards, 68 on the same completion percentage, as a matter of fact, but now it's 30 touchdowns and it's 9.4 yards per attempt, simply because Penn State has a receiving weapon on the outside now? What if Jim Knowles, who historically his defenses have taken 3 years to get to peak level, but also I think this is the most ready-made defense he's had at any stop, because even at Ohio State, yes, it was an uptick in talent, but they were super young. There were a lot of guys who were playing positions for the very first time, which is why 22, it was pretty decent, but it gave up a lot of explosives. 23, it was pretty decent, but sometimes you could get walked down the field. 24, they gave up nothing. But what if it's already super, super experienced? And I know they lost Abdul Carter, but they still have denied Dennis Sutton there. They still got that really good secondary. So what if Jim Knowles produces a defense that's only given up 13 points per game? I mean, the last 2 years, the winner of the Ohio State-Penn State game was 13 last year, where the offense didn't score a single touchdown, and 20-12. Okay. Can Penn State score 24 points this year on Ohio State in a game that might be low scoring? He's not number 1 on my list. He's number 2 on my list for that reason of, okay, Penn State's got elite defense. Their offense doesn't have anybody you can throw the ball to. So what if you give Drew Aller a weapon, which is exactly why you have them as high as you do too?
Well, you said how many touchdowns he had last year? 9. So we're talking in the regular season, almost, he's almost worth 1 touchdown a game. I mean, that's a tie game against Ohio State. That's, a win in a 3-point loss like that. If he is worth, it's kind of like in baseball when they talk about like wins above replacement, like how many wins is a guy worth like in a season? Like if he's worth about a touchdown a game, how many wins is he worth? Could he be the difference between a loss against a top 5 team and a win against a top 5 team? Maybe that top 5 team isn't Ohio State. Maybe Penn State beats Oregon this year because Pena has a big game. But that's games that Penn State has traditionally lost. So having a weapon like that could unlock something for them that they haven't had since Dotson.
Yeah. And Dotson killed Ohio State in 2020. Now, granted, Justin Fields, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson were so good that Penn State was playing comeback that entire second half. But that's what we're talking about here. What if you get those weapons back for Drew Aller, who everybody seems to think is going to be a top 5 draft pick a year from now? What if you get that guy a weapon? And Penn State, Ohio State games are historically already pretty competitive. What does that mean for James Franklin? We still don't think it leads to a win because it's James Franklin. but it at least makes it a little bit more enticing if we see some different things out of Penn State. Especially, I think they play Oregon first before they play Ohio State. So we're going to learn a lot about Penn State through that Oregon game. So my number one wasn't Nico either. My number one actually isn't a guy who was just like a school Ohio State might play to a school Ohio State might play. Mine was Hero Kanu leaving Ohio State for Texas. I think that is, and it's becoming more apparent by the day as you're seeing what's in the portal. It's not great. The defensive tackle options in the spring portal are just not great. They're not great for Ohio State standards. I won't say they're good football players. They're just not the standard that Ohio State is looking for. And in a world where we got through 15 spring practices and we're still like, are Jason Moore and Tywan Malone ready? Is Will Smith ready? And those guys are in year 3 or more in the program and you're still saying that. I'm not worried about Ohio State's ability to get after the passer. I think between Bo Atkinson, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, CJ Hicks, Arvell Reese, and Sonny Styles, and Peyton Pierce as blitzers, I don't have any concerns about Ohio State's ability to get after the passer. You can even throw Edric Houston and Caden McDonald into that mix. I am worried about Ohio State's ability to stop the run in 2025. Texas wasn't a great running offense last year, so maybe it doesn't apply as much to Texas in terms of their ability to run. I think they averaged like 4.3 yards per carry last year. They used their running backs more in space.
Different quarterback, though.
Game. Yeah, different quarterback, too. You think back to the Marshall game. Remember when Tyreek Williams missed the Marshall game, and so those guys, that depth had to play, and Marshall just kept running QB draw up the middle of the field, and it was consistently successful time after time after time? Well, that was in a world where you knew, man, Tyreek's at least going to come back one day to save this. Tyreek's not coming back anymore. He lives in Detroit. So, like, imagine Arch Manning, it's 3rd and 4, QB draw up the middle. But also, you know who they play at the end of the season? A team who likes to run the ball up the middle.
I was going to say, if we're talking regular season, it's usually the same team.
Yeah. A team that likes to run the ball up the middle. So what if that's your weak point? What if that's the defensive tackle depth is not great, and you get to the third quarter against Michigan, Edric Houston and Caden McDonald are on snaps number 44 and 45. You have to sub them because they are dog tired. And then you go with your depth, and Michigan just runs all over them. Or you don't go with the depth because you don't trust it, and those two are on snaps 44 and 45, and they're dog tired, so Michigan runs all over them. And the same thing can go for Penn State. They've got 2 quality running backs. Texas with a running quarterback. Maybe Washington can pull some stuff out of a hat. Illinois, as we were talking about. I'm looking for the Ohio State weaknesses. And on defense right now, it's defensive tackle. And this can change. And Hero Kanu can go from number 1 on my list to not being on my list at all, depending on what happens in the Texas game. Because it's not about, he's going to go to Texas and be a stud. It's the fact that he's not on Ohio State's roster when they could have drastically used a third defensive tackle right now, especially since I think if you had to rank them as run stoppers based on the small sample we've seen from them, I think it's Caden McDonald and Hero Kanu are the 2 best run stoppers at defensive tackle. And you lost one of your 2 best run stoppers to a team who's also on your schedule while playing in a conference where teams seem to run the ball all the time.
Yeah, I think the thing with Hero Kanu, too, is, and I'll talk about where I had him on my list in a second. But the thing with him is you're not just talking about facing him week 1. Texas could win the SEC this year, whether they win or lose to Ohio State in week 1. And Ohio State could win the Big Ten, whether they win or lose to Texas week 1.
Yep.
Like, these are 2 teams that, I mean, this is probably the most interesting part of the whole, like, Quinn Ewers discussion and the misevaluation. And by the way, that was a topic that Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman were talking about today. The whole Quinn Ewers misevaluation thing is just this nature of he still made 2 college football playoff semifinals. And in one of the seasons, he had to win some games he had to win a game to get to the college football. No, he had to win 2 games to get to the college football semifinals. So this is a team that whatever you want to say about, is Texas back and whatever you want to say about Quinn Ewers, they made back-to-back years, they've been among the 4 final teams standing in college football. So there's a chance you see this team twice this season. I wrote down Hero Kanu / all the defensive linemen that Texas added because I went into the 247 Sports transfer portal rankings and was looking at Texas's class.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 best portal players they got are defensive linemen. And I don't, and that's not the extent of, that's not even like all the defensive linemen they got.
No, it's
but
not.
The top 5 players they got in the transfer portal, this includes winter and spring defensive linemen. It also includes, so actually, like Murad Watson was a guy who I found interesting too, just because he's a Syracuse defensive tackle who was in the spring portal window, went to Texas, who Ohio State was kind of, murmured to be in the discussions with. He's probably the guy that would have looked at and said that guy would have been good enough to play for you. I don't know about the other defensive tackles in the portal. That was probably the one guy I would have circled. So, like, they've got dudes on the defensive line that they went out and got in the portal. Hero Canoe, obviously, among them, and that one maybe most directly impacts Ohio State because you could say Ohio State could have and should have had that guy on their 2025 roster and he left. But, like, they went out and they said, we need defensive line help. And this is a team that might have the best defensive lineman in the country on their roster already in College City.
Can I ask you a question? Let's do a trade real quick. Texas asked for Jeremiah Smith. How many defensive tackles is Jeremiah Smith worth?
I think you say we'll figure it out with Caden and Hedrick Houston. We'll get Jason Moore to be up to speed. We'll figure it out.
Fair. Okay.
Because what's Ohio State's counter to a team running it a ton and scoring a ton? Throw it to JJ.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. How many defensive tackles is Carnell Tate worth? Now we're cooking. Let's go. How many is Brandon Ennis worth? Actually, no. If you Brandon Ennis, you probably have to bring Max Clare. So this gets Brandon Ennis and Max Clare. How many defensive tackles does Texas have to give Ohio State? I might say 2 in a future recruiting commit.
Maybe. But when you start talking about Brandon Ennis and Carnell Tate, I'd let me know where Milan and Quincy Porter are, and then
that's
I might
what I'm saying. You might be able to fleece Texas because you might be able to get like 4 defensive tackles for those 2, and it's like, oh, it's okay. We had Quincy Porter and Milan Graham, so joke's on you. You gave us more than you had to give us.
Great, we'll play Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, we'll play new Garrett and new JJ alongside old JJ. Okay, I love how it's just like untouchable, Jeremiah Smith. I'll give you 7 defensive tackles. Not enough. Okay, so Hero was number 1 on my list. Trevor Pena was number 1 on your list. He was number 2 on my list. So my top 2 are gone. Who's number 2 for you?
So this is my number 2, but has an asterisk next to it.
Okay.
Because I don't know if he's going to start.
And
I think we're all assuming that he's not going to start, but what if he doesn't? What if he's good? And that's Fresno State transfer Mikey Keene, quarterback who transferred to Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all assuming that Bryce Underwood was going to start. I'm assuming that Bryce Underwood was going to start, at least by the time we get to the Ohio State game. Maybe he doesn't start week 1, but I think Michigan's going to probably get to a point in October where it's like, if things aren't going well and Sharon Moore's trying to prove some things, you toss in the rookie and you try to prove your worth.
Yeah.
But if Mikey Keene's good and this Michigan offense takes a step forward and they're, let's say Mikey Keene leads them to, I don't have their schedule in front of me, but let's say they start 8-2, they start 9-2, something like that. And Mikey Keene's playing well. I mean, that's the starting quarterback at Michigan. And that is the biggest game on Ohio State's schedule every year. So I have him at number 2 behind Pena, but it's an asterisk because if he doesn't start, then this goes out the window.
I don't think he's going to start. So it was hard for me to throw him on. I'm pulling up Michigan's schedule right now because I'm trying to even envision. I do have a Michigan player on my list. It just wasn't him.
I have another one, yeah.
Okay. So New Mexico, Oklahoma, Central Michigan, Nebraska bye. Wisconsin, USC, Washington, Michigan State, Purdue bye. Northwestern, Maryland, and then Ohio State.
It's actually a pretty easy schedule.
Yeah. Michigan somehow got an easy schedule 2 years in a row.
How did they not get Penn State or Oregon? I guess they got Oregon last year. Did they play Penn State last year?
No. They didn't play Penn State last year. Michigan, man. I'll tell you what. This is the most ideal rebuild situation that you could have come into if you were Sharon Moore, where it's like you're taking over. Your first year, you go 7-5 in a relatively decent schedule and you beat your rival. And in year 2, when people think you're going to get back to the playoff, you essentially have 11 weeks to build up to Ohio State. Mikey Keene, Last year at Fresno State, completed 70% of his passes for 2,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. The year before that, he completed 67% of his passes for almost 3,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He was at UCF before that. He started in 2021 for 1,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and then only played 4 games in 2022 before hitting the transfer portal. The reason why I pulled up that schedule is because I do not think they're going to start Bryce Underwood week 1. And I wanted to see if they had a schedule that would allow them to essentially do what they did in 2023, I believe it was. It was 22, when they had, who's the quarterback who transferred to Iowa? Cade McNamara. When they had Cade McNamara and they had Vikings quarterback now.
JJ McCarthy.
JJ McCarthy. When they had Cade and they had JJ, and the first couple of weeks there, I think JJ started a game. I think Cade started a game. And they kind of had this back and forth thing. Kind of the same thing that Clemson did in 2018 with Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant, where they had both of these guys and let them both play. And then by game 4, you knew who the starting quarterback was. You got 4 games and then a bye week. I think Mikey Key starts against New Mexico. I also think Bryce Underwood plays against New Mexico. Oklahoma's not a terrible non-conference game.
Yeah, especially because that's and that's on the road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough environment.
I think they both play. I think Mikey Keene might start, because do you want to throw a true freshman into that environment in his second ever game as a college football player? I think then you got another non-Power 4 game against Central Michigan. I think Bryce Underwood might start that game. But they both play.
Definitely if they lose against Oklahoma.
If they lose against Oklahoma, Bryce Underwood starting. But I think, again, the first 3 games, both of them play. And by Nebraska game, you pick your starter, which is probably going to be Bryce Underwood, and you roll with it. Because then, regardless of what happens in that Nebraska game, you can come up for air for that bye week and then get into the meat of your schedule after that. But I think this is a 4-game buildup to not just throw the kitchen sink at Bryce Underwood. It gives Mikey Keene, who's a guy from Fresno State, so it's not like he's coming from another Power 4 school, to have a chance to battle and keep the job. But I think they're probably going to go with Bryce Underwood long term there, which is why I kept Mikey Keene off of my list. But I'll introduce the other Michigan guy I did have on my list, though, Justice Haynes, the Alabama running back transfer, just because. Okay, they need it goes back to what we were talking about with Hero Canoe. Can Ohio State stop the run this year? Because if Ohio State can't stop the run this year, then Justice Haynes, who's a former top 100, might have the Hassan Haskins, Donovan Edwards type of day, where he might have the best day of his career that day, because Ohio State doesn't know if they can stop the run yet. And so, because, again, my biggest concern about Ohio State heading into the summer is, can they stop the run? Well, Michigan likes to run the ball, and they've got a pretty talented running back from Alabama who can run the ball for them, that Ohio State wanted out of high school when Tony Alford was still here. He is now high on my threat level if Ohio State can't figure out through 11 games how to stop the run. If they go from being one of the 3 best teams in college football at stopping the run, 2.65 yards per attempt last year, to some level what they were in 2021 when it comes to simply just stopping the run, they were 3.68. So if they're in the 20s when it comes to stopping the run in 2025, I'm on high alert for what if Michigan can exploit that at the end of the season if Ohio State never figures out how to stop the run, because they just don't have the depth of defensive tackle and the run stoppers up the middle to be able to do so.
Yeah, and we're looking at a Michigan team that ran the ball a ton last year, and it wasn't a particularly great offense. And now I think we both agree that they're improving at quarterback, and I think they're also improving at running back. That's scary to think about if you're an Ohio State fan.
My next guy is Dylan Thiemann from Oregon. And that's the other Purdue guy who was high profile, who left Ohio State, was in the mix for that guy. He ends up at Oregon. He was supposed to visit Ohio State, but ends up just canceling all that and committing to Oregon. I think that I don't have like a strong reason for why he's on my list, other than he was the best safety in the portal, and there was a world that could have existed where Ohio State lost Lathan Ransom, replaced him with Purdue's Lathan Ransom, and they had the best safety tandem in the country once again in 2025. And instead he's at Oregon. And Ohio State doesn't play Oregon this year, so the threat level is low. But I mean, are you expecting right now for Ohio State and Oregon to be meeting in Indianapolis?
If I were to pick Indianapolis, yeah, I'd probably say Ohio State and the winner of the Penn State Oregon game.
So Oregon.
So Oregon, yes. That would be the two I have. And admittedly, my list was shorter than yours, so I didn't have him on my list. But I did have an Oregon player on my list. I had Isaiah World, the offensive tackle that they got from Nevada, who was projected first-round pick. And, I think we kind of had this conversation the other day of if I could pick anyone, I'm taking Caden Proctor at tackle instead of Isaiah World just because Caden's done it at Alabama. Then I'll take him over a guy coming over from Nevada. But a big thing that contributed to Ohio State's struggles against Oregon last year was, as much as we blame the secondary and specifically Denzel Burke, the pass rush wasn't terrific that game. I think we had a lot of some hard discussions about Jack and JT at that point and maybe them not living up to expectations when Ohio State lost that game against Oregon. So I look at Isaiah World and I say, if he turns out to be what we think he can be, that basically could eliminate your pass rush on one side of the line. And that could open up a lot of things for Oregon, even in a secondary that I think is stacked this year. So Isaiah World, if he is what we think he is, could be a very big kind of X factor in a meeting between Ohio State and Oregon. And if they don't meet in Indianapolis, they could very well meet in the playoff, because I think right now they're both playoff teams. So maybe it ends up being the same path. There's going to be Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, I think all make the playoff. And obviously one of those teams isn't making it to Indianapolis. Could that team be the one that goes to the Rose Bowl like Ohio State did and faces the Big Ten champ, right? Like if we don't think Penn State makes it to Indy, could Penn State be an 8 seed who faces 1 seed Ohio State in the Rose Bowl? Which would be interesting because we think Ohio State is going to beat Penn State. So it could literally set up the same exact thing where the loser is the 8 seed and comes in with some momentum and is playing in the Rose Bowl in an interesting game, and Ohio State would just beat Penn State again. But it would make for a nice storyline for Ohio State to be on the opposite side of that. But the point is, Isaiah World, I think, could eliminate basically one half of Ohio State's pass rush if he is what we think he can.
Let's take a break because I had 3 Oregon players on my list, and I want to continue this conversation because it's another offensive lineman. So let's pay the bills, and then we'll come back and continue to talk about a team Ohio State doesn't play unless they get to Indianapolis here on Buckeye Talk.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre al app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
Vitamin Water was born in New York because New Yorkers wanted more. Like more flavor to go with all the flavor. A refreshing drink after climbing 6 flights of stairs to a walk-up apartment or standing in the subway station in 100-degree heat. Focus when I have an 8-hour shift. And XXX after I was out all night at a club. Call XXX. Drink vitamin water. It's from New York.
Out here, there's no one way of doing things. No unwritten rules. And no shortage of adventure. Because out here, the only requirement is having fun. Bank of America invites kids 6 to 18 to golf with us. For a limited time, sign them up for a free 1-year membership, giving them access to discounted tee times at thousands of courses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/golf with us. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Restrictions apply. See BofA.com/golf with us for complete details. Copyright 2025 Bank of America Corporation.
We're back on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik talking about some transfer additions across the country that might impact Ohio State, its chances to win a national championship, its chances to win a Big Ten championship, and its chances to continue to be at the top of college football as they are right now. Dylan Thiemann, again, he was on the list because he was the most talented safety in the transfer portal in Ohio State has a question mark at safety. But again, that's a guy who could easily not be on the list by the time we get through the Texas game if Malik Hartford and Jalen McClain and Leroy Roker take the step that we think they have the ability to take. You said Isaiah World. Isaiah World at Nevada, for the last 3 years. He's been their starting left tackle, though he started at right tackle in 2022 for a little bit. 159 pass blocking snaps. He's given up 14 sacks and 87 pressures. But 11 of those sacks came in 2022 when he was a first-year starter. He's given up 3 sacks the last 2 years, and he gave up 38 pressures in 2022 and 34 pressures in 2023. Only 15 of the 87 pressures he's given up in his career came last year at Nevada, which is why he was the number 2 player in the transfer portal this offseason. And I think Ohio State tried to go after that, but we have to remember that these are college kids, and so there's maybe some academic stuff that kept them from being a realistic option for Ohio State, because Ohio State's actually a pretty prestigious university around the country. You got to have a certain GPA and whatnot to get into the school. The other guy I want to present is Emmanuel Pregnon, and I hope I'm saying that name correctly. It might be Pregnon. He's a starting left guard for USC the last 2 years after transferring from Wyoming after the 2022 season. In his 2 years with USC, he did not give up a single sack, and he's given up 39 pressures in his career. He gave up 2 sacks while he was at Wyoming. None in the last 2 years. He's given up 39 pressures in his career and 1,354 pass blocking snaps. So, that's your left side, right? And so this is a Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, Bo Atkinson, CJ Hicks conversation, but it's also an Edric Houston and Caden McDonald conversation of going up against this guy on the interior, and it's what you're talking about here. Denzel Burke had the worst game of his career on a day where Oregon had a wide receiver have his best game of his career. But also, there was no pass rush. Dylan Gabriel was not pressured very much at all unless they sent blitzers. We get to Indianapolis. You can't have Dante Moore if he ends up being their starting quarterback. And I know Austin Novosad's the main guy he's battling, but it seems like Dante Moore is going to win that battle. If Dante Moore is as comfortable in the pocket as Dylan Gabriel was on October 12th, Ohio State's going to lose to Oregon in Indianapolis. But if Dante Moore is as uncomfortable as Dylan Gabriel was on January 1st, Ohio State's going to do in Indianapolis to Oregon what it did to Oregon in the Rose Bowl all over again. So that's just what but also that's what it comes down to. I think Oregon did a good job of replenishing its offensive line through the portal this year, while Ohio State drastically lost experience on its defensive line from last year. And so the good news is you don't have to play them in the middle of the season. The good news is you would only have to play them in games that both of you would have to earn the right to be in. But also, we're going to know about this pass rush by the time they would potentially play Oregon. We're going to know whether or not these good guys are good enough to get after the passer. If we get to the end of the season and Ohio State's got 25 sacks, we're going to go, okay, Ohio State's in trouble against Oregon. If we get to the end of the season and Ohio State's got 35 plus sacks, we're like, okay, Ohio State might blow Oregon off the field.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is I alluded to this on one of our previous pods of I don't necessarily love Oregon's approach of offensive line specifically being something that they replenish in the portal. If they're going to, kind of keep doing this year after year, I'd like to have some guys who have played together and developed and things of that nature together. That said, by the time you get to December, all these portal guys have played together. They've built some level of comfort. So if Ohio State was playing Oregon week 1, I don't know if I'm necessarily too concerned. But we're getting to December, and these guys have gotten to play together and know each other's tendencies, and they're comfortable together. That becomes a really scary left side of the offensive line if those guys are cruising.
I'm assuming I've got 2 more people on my list. I'm assuming your list is over with.
I have one more person on my list who we haven't talked about, but we've mentioned. That's Nico.
Okay. Let me mention these other 2 people, and then we can talk about Nico. I have Takario Davis, the Arizona cornerback who transferred to Washington. And it's just simply because Washington's in year 2 of a rebuild, and you're just looking for interesting names there. And I wouldn't even necessarily call it a threat the same way, because this is the guy who's probably going to spend a lot of time on JJ and Carnell. But he's 6'4", 190. And I think that's an intriguing matchup, at least for JJ, because how many cornerbacks are 6'4" in a world where JJ is 6'3", 6'4", 215 pounds? I just think that might be a fun thing to watch. He was targeted 50 times last year. The majority he had 13 targets against Utah last year, but he was targeted 50 times, gave up 27 catches for 464 yards, no touchdowns, and had 3 pass breakups. And He plays outside corner mainly, but I'm interested. I'm looking for people who might challenge the king.
Yeah. I think the game that everyone's like, obviously Penn State, Michigan, Texas, games that are scary on Ohio State's schedule. And then kind of Illinois has been circled as that like watch out game. Like they might be pretty decent. It's on the road. Ohio State's first road test is at Washington.
Right.
That's a long trip, a very tough environment, and you got a young quarterback. That's a tricky game if Washington does take a step forward in year 2 under Fish. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then yeah, the dude who's going to be defending JJ and Carnell is going to play a big role. So I like that. I think maybe the Washington game gets kind of overlooked on Ohio State's schedule a bit too much.
Like Ohio State's going to play a weird football game. No team is elite every single week, even if you're playing. Like, what's the Nebraska game in 2025 where we're all looking at each other and we're like, why is Ohio State struggling to beat this team right now? This makes absolutely no sense.
Why is Ohio State losing in the fourth quarter?
Right. And I'm just looking for that game. And the Washington game, I'm not going to say that it's 100% going to be that game, but it's you play Texas week 1, and then you just kind of come up for air and breathe for 2 weeks. And then you go into a bye week. So is Ohio State rusty for 20 minutes before they get going there? And then Washington takes advantage of that. And so because of that, it's 10-7 at halftime. Ohio State ends up winning the game 38-13 or something like that. But it's 10-7 at halftime when we're going, yo, what are we doing? And then I'm just interested to see how Ohio State handles that bye week. Last year, they called it the improvement week when they had such the early bye week, and they allowed the Oregon game to be their actual bye. But both of their bye weeks, they're coming off of those games and those weeks, and they're playing Penn State and they're playing Washington. So I would assume they might just allow the early one to be the bye week because they might need to be full throttle when the back half of your season is Penn State right off of a bye week, UCLA, which is what we're getting ready to talk about in a minute, and then Michigan at the end of the season. I'm just wondering how they handle that first bye week because in my time being here, Ohio State has not always handled its bye weeks the best. And then the other guy I had on here is, I'll ask you first, and I'm asking you more as an alum than I am as a journalist right now. Do you think Indiana, what's your confidence levels, 1 to 10, that Indiana gets to Indianapolis?
To Indy, probably like 6. Maybe even lower than that.
Okay. Because if we don't think they can get to Indianapolis, then this is not a thing. Because Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, that's 3-0. Illinois, toss-up. Iowa, toss-up. Oregon, toss-up. That is a rough 3 games in 4 weeks. They've got a bye split into that thing. That's a rough 3 games in 4 weeks. Michigan State, I think, should be a W. UCLA is now a toss-up because of their quarterback. Maryland, that's a W. Penn State, toss-up. Wisconsin's probably a W. And Purdue's a toss-up. Okay, so if we don't think they have a chance to get to the Big Ten championship game, then maybe this is not as much of a conversation, but I wanted to throw Fernando Mendoza on this list just in case Cignetti pulls a rabbit out of the hat again. He was California's quarterback the last 2 years. 3,000 yards, 6 TDs, and 6 interceptions last year on 68.7 completion percentage, 7.8 yards per attempt. And the year before that, he was 63 completion percentage for 14 touchdowns and 10 interceptions as a first-year starter. Maybe Cignetti can pull some Curtis Rourke magic and pull something out of him that California couldn't pull out of him. So that's the only reason I included him as more of a respect to Cignetti and what he did last year, and maybe he can repeat it more than anything else.
Yeah, I think what's tough for me is that I think between Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State, and maybe even Michigan, 2 of those teams is going to make it, and Indiana plays Penn State and Oregon. Even if they split that, I think the team that they lose to probably ends up going to Indy over that. I think they're going to have some tiebreakers that probably don't go in their favor there.
That is the epitome of balance. Last year you played none of these teams, and now you have to play all of them. Keeps you healthy. It keeps you whole. Okay,
Indiana really benefited last year from Michigan not being good.
And Washington. Yeah. They had the 2 teams who played in the national championship on their schedule, and they were like, we're not good anymore. So it's not their fault. Okay, let's talk about Nico. I want to use last year's game as the example here. Nico was under pressure on 43.2% of his 44 dropbacks in the college football playoff.
That's it.
6% of the time, he was not blitzed. According to PFF, and take these with a grain of salt. And part of the reason we say take this with a grain of salt is these numbers are constantly changing. You'll look at PFF one day and a guy's grade is like 89.2, and then the next day it's 86. Right? It's constantly evolving, living, breathing site almost. Because I'm pretty sure I sent these numbers to our texters 2 days after the CFP game, and it said he was not blitzed on 90%. So that's changed. But the point of the matter is 44 dropbacks. Ohio State only blitzed him on 5 of those dropbacks. And yet they got him under pressure on 43.2% of those dropbacks. Now, granted, a lot of the people that were doing the pressuring are not on this team anymore. But also, Go Iemalava is at a worse program now. So I think that equals it out now. 14 for 31 for 104 yards, no touchdowns. He did have 20 carries, and he did score 2 touchdowns there. Why is Nico Iemalava, when that's what happened the last time he came to Columbus, and now he's going to come back to Columbus this year on November 15th with a worse environment? Why does he deserve to be on our list?
Because if he's better and he's as good as some people think he can be, then maybe that's the Nebraska game on Ohio State's schedule. Because I don't think Dylan Raiola played particularly great in that game against Ohio State.
No, he didn't.
He didn't make a ton of mistakes, though. And Nebraska kind of hung around in that game until the end. So if Nico could come in, not make mistakes, but also maybe make a few plays that Dylan Raiola didn't make as a true freshman, because Nico's experienced and has kind of been there and done that, and maybe just as good of a talent, then maybe that's enough for an upset to happen. This is all based on if Nico lives up to projections and takes a step from where he was last year, which I thought he was okay last year. So if he takes a step forward, he could be pretty good. Maybe live up to the hype. Let me ask you a question that I don't think has been asked enough in the Nico conversation, because it's such a big name. It was such a fiery decision. It was also kind of a headline when we needed headlines in college football, because the spring portal cycle, although there were a lot of guys this year,
it was boring.
There were only maybe 2 or 3 that were a name, and Nico was the biggest name because of the position and the school he left and everything that transpired, the way it went down. He's the first holdout / trade in college football history. Are we sure Nico is great? Because I think he's good. But if he's not great, then what does it matter?
And that's why Tennessee let him walk. Because, and we've joked about this, you and I, a lot, this idea of Josh Heupel likes to spread things out. He's literally got his wide receivers outside the hash marks. Play fast, run a bunch of plays, and push the ball down the field. Bubble screen, screen pass, bubble screen pass, sprinkle and a run, and then they throw it down the yard. And he did none of that. He did that with Hendon Hooker, who was a Virginia Tech transfer. He did that with Joe Milton, who was a career backup transfer. But he got the 5-star quarterback who was one of the 10 best players in his recruiting class, and he didn't want to do any of those things. Now, granted, Dylan Sampson was awesome. He was the SEC Player of the Year. So, yes, you had an elite running back. But you had a 5-star quarterback, and you didn't want to do any of the things that your entire offense has been the entire existence of you as a coach. And that's throw the ball. Why didn't you want to do those things? With the guy from a recruiting talent standpoint, you probably should have done it more with him. I'm glad you brought up the Nebraska game. So Nico Iemalava, as I said, 14 of 31 for 104 yards, 20 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown. Dylan Raiola, 21 of 32 for 152 yards, the late interception to Jordan Hancock. He also had 9 carries for 31 yards. I mentioned all those pressure rate numbers for Nico earlier. Here's Dylan's. 41 dropbacks. He was under pressure for 17.1 of them. He was under pressure for 7 of his 41 dropbacks. In a game where Ohio State blitzed him on 21 of those 41 dropbacks. Well, Jim Knowles tried to go at young, true freshman Dylan. Jim Knowles sat back and forced Nico to make throws from the pocket. But the defensive line also showed up and did its job that day, so he could just sit back. He didn't just sit back against Dylan Raiola. I don't know what that means. I don't even know if I'm making a point there. But I'm more confident right now, and Ohio State doesn't play Nebraska this year. If Ohio State played Nebraska this year, I would be more inclined to say between Nebraska and UCLA, which team is more equipped based on their quarterback play to pull off an upset against Ohio State? I might say Nebraska. I think we might find out that Josh Heupel hid Nico a lot more than maybe we all even realized. Because again, sure, he might be better, but his environment is objectively worse than it was a year ago. And the environment he left that is objectively better by significant margin, he was under pressure 44% of the time. So how much more under pressure is he going to be this time around? And he didn't handle it well. He was over 7 on the 19 dropbacks where he got pressured. And he also got sacked a bunch. I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's good enough to be the type of quarterback that becomes a thorn in Ohio State's side, especially because of when they have to play Ohio State, November 15th. Ohio State's not coming off of a bye week. They're 2 weeks removed from the Penn State game, so if they win that game, that emotional high, they're not going to catch them slipping the way that Purdue can sometimes catch teams slipping. Ohio State's probably going to be rolling at that point. I think Nico's a very talented quarterback, but he doesn't scare me. And maybe if he would have put together a better showing in a better environment, he would scare me a little bit more in a way that I think Dylan Raiola in year 2 might scare me if they were on Ohio State's schedule.
Yeah, and even when he wasn't playing, Ohio State, like, sure, that's an insane defense to go against and whatnot. Like, I'm going through some of these numbers. Like, I remember watching Tennessee versus
not great
Georgia, and it wasn't great. I'm trying to see, like, he had 167 passing yards against Georgia. He had 174 passing yards against a terrible Mississippi State defense. His best game looked, 292 yards against Kentucky in a 28-18 win, and then had 1 touchdown. Like, I don't know. It's just, I'm not completely sold on him. So the splash of him leaving this offseason was always more about kind of the underlying factors than it was about him as a talent going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, dude, like, there's this Shedeur thing that happened in the draft of him falling where, everyone's talking about his personality and his dad and things of that nature. Like, if NFL teams thought Shedeur was as good as the number 2 overall pick, he would have gone earlier in the draft. You can look past that stuff. It wasn't good enough to have to also deal with the stuff that came with it. When it came to Nico and he left and teams were like, make an example out of this guy, don't give him a bag. Listen, if he was Joe Burrow, guess what? Georgia would have given him a bag.
Yeah.
Or I guess in the SEC, you can't in the spring portal, but Michigan would have given him a bag.
Yeah.
Washington would teams would have gone after him. Teams, they didn't want to deal with the baggage because he wasn't good enough to have to deal with the bag.
Yeah. The better you are at something, the more people will put up with.
Right.
So, I don't know. I guess, did you think he was going to be a threat when we were preparing for the college football playoff game?
No, I was more, if anything, I was more worried about the running game just because Ohio State had some games where mobile quarterbacks mixed with a good running back. The biggest fear in that game was the emotional side of it. How was Ohio State going to respond from Michigan?
Yeah.
There was not a lot of X's and O's where I was terrified.
I thought that maybe something would click because you get essentially 20 days to prepare for the game. He's still a 5-star quarterback who's got a full season under his belt. He has played in some environments. He had the Oklahoma game. He had the Georgia game, the Alabama game. He's played some decent teams in a way that there's enough experience there that maybe you get to end the year 2 and year 2 in the program, year 1 as a starter, and it starts to show in 2025, college football is in trouble. And again, Ohio State got after him. So some of that, to your point, was the emotional part of this of like Ohio State's defensive line turned supernova for four games. But I didn't see anything. I didn't see a throw, a run, a play that let me know that maybe they didn't rely on him much in 2024 because they didn't have to. They had Dylan Sampson in a really good running game. But now that he's older, if they get him a weapon or two in the portal, Trevor Pena, what if he had gone to Tennessee? And let's take if the Tennessee thing had never happened and Nico's still there this year, and they go get Trevor Pena in the portal right now. there's a world where we're looking at this like, okay, Tennessee's got a really good weapon. I know they've lost some guys, but they've got Nico a weapon. They're ready to throw the ball around. And Josh Heupel, the offense that we know him to always be, is going to be back in 2025. I do not think that was on the table for Josh Heupel this year. I think it was going to be more of what we saw this past year, where try to get him to third and shorts and mitigate how often Nico has to be the guy for you. Okay, well, now he's at UCLA, where it's not just on third down he's going to have to be the guy. He's going to have to be the guy on first, second, and third down. I don't know if that's going to translate in a way that makes him a threat to Ohio State. He is on this list because he is a 5-star quarterback in the Big Ten. And Big Ten quarterback play is significantly upgrading this year. At least on paper, it looks like it's upgrading with what Dante Moore might be at Oregon, what UCLA might have in Nico, Drew Aller in year 3 as a starter, year 4 in the program. Michigan might be starting Bryce Underwood, either that or a more veteran guy. Their quarterback play is regardless going to be better than it was a year ago. Aiden Childs might be a little bit better at Michigan State. The overall USC got the Maleva kid who took the job from Miller Moss last year. The overall quarterback play in the conference is going to be better. And you just plop the guy who's a former 5-star recruit on top of all of that. And Ohio State plays him, and they just played him a year ago. That's why he's on this list. I don't think he's on this list because he's a threat level, which is why when you didn't have him at number 1, I wasn't shocked that you didn't have him at number 1. I was more like, oh, okay, we're on the same page about this.
Yeah, maybe this would have been a good pod to have Andrew on, because I think he's a little higher on Nico than the both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's listeners that disagree. Sorry if we created an echo chamber. Steve and I are just not completely sold on Nico. When I saw a mock draft that had him at like 15 overall, I was just kind of like, based on what exactly?
Nobody knows what they're doing with quarterbacks, man. That's the secret that nobody wants to say out loud. Nobody knows what they're doing with quarterbacks. Even the quarterback gurus don't know what they're doing with quarterbacks. They don't play enough football to know. I can't wait. Yes, I can. I'm enjoying the offseason right now. I'm not rushing the season to get here. But I can't wait until that week. And we break down what Nico has been. They'll have played 7 or 8 games at that point. Ohio State will have played 7, 8, or 8 games at that point. I can't wait till us three have because I think that's going to be our big picture pod that week. He's just talking about Nico and Julian Sands / Lincoln Keno, whoever wins this battle, and how much it's going to matter if one quarterback outplays the other one, what we think of Nico, just an overarching conversation about that. Because right now, you're right. You and I, we weren't really all that sold on Nico going into that game, and we're definitely not sold on him now. And Andrew might be on the other side, which might create a healthy conversation that week, especially because we'll know enough about whoever Ohio State starting quarterback is to have a conversation.
They play Utah week 1.
Yeah.
Like, Nico's getting tested right away. Utah, they're at UNLV, who I know they lost their coach, but they were pretty good last year. Dan Mullen, I think, is a pretty decent coach. New Mexico, they're at Northwestern, and then it's Penn State at Michigan State, Maryland at Indiana, Nebraska at Ohio State, Washington at USC. If they lose at Utah, like we're talking, or if they lose against Utah at home, it's, I don't know if that's neutral or if it's at home, but I know it's not on the road. 1, 2.
It's at home because the UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl.
I mean, I'd pencil in like 5 losses if they lose against Utah.
Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah, I put them in the new Indiana category because they have a 5-star quarterback. But it's weird. I can't wait till November 15th to see how we're talking about that team and how we're talking about him. Because right now, I think 7-5 might be where we're at with this. But I don't know. What if the Utah game happens and we find out Nico was right? They should have used him more at Tennessee and they didn't, and now he's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm not banking on it, though, but I'm not going to rule it out.
I could see us getting to mid-October where he's had games against Utah and against Penn State and just looked poor in both games, and you're just telling yourself, like, this guy's just... Listen, NFL teams aren't looking at what you did against New Mexico or Northwestern. Like, a big thing, and I know, like, take yourself back to, like, this NFL draft. A big thing when Deshaun Watson came out was, look what he did against Alabama. And he was a damn good quarterback when he started his NFL career.
Mm-hmm.
No one was talking about what he did against Duke or North Carolina. It was like, do you see that guy every time he played against Alabama and the fits he gave Nick Saban's defenses? So if Nico comes out next year and it's, oh yeah, he had great numbers. Did you see what he did against Utah and Penn State and Ohio State and USC, whatever? Like, I don't know, man. I'm not completely sold on him, but we'll see what happens, I guess.
Unless you're Jackson Dart, then those are the only games that matter. The Giants will take you in the first round. But to your point, I mean, CJ Stroud, he went number 2 because of what he did against Georgia. He was awesome his whole career, but what he did against Georgia is the reason why he was a number 2 pick in the NFL draft. He's an interesting prospect that we're going to have to talk about this year when we get to that game. Get the text, 614-350-3315. Let us know what you think. That's our list. It's our list of guys that moved around this offseason that might have an impact on Ohio State and its ability to win a national title and win a Big Ten title in 2025, with Nico being maybe the most complex of all those guys. 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Let us know how you feel. That's it for this week. It'll wrap up the work week for us. As Ohio State likes to say, work week is done. We've already recorded next week's pods. On Monday, Stefan and I were re-tiering. I completely forgot we did this in February, but we had to redo it because Nico Iamaleava left for UCLA. So we tiered the Big Ten once again coming out of the spring after some of the movement around the conference. Same tiers. I did change one tier, though. One tier was called Fun and Frisky. Now it's called New Indiana. College football playoff or bust, natty or bust, New Indiana. Rebuilding, now or never, and they exist. Those are our tiers. And then on Tuesday, Andrew and I have already recorded this. We're predicting Ohio State's 2026 recruiting class. Is the first time we're going to do it. We'll probably do it 2 more times between now and signing day in December. And then on Wednesday, this should be fun. I waited till all 3 of us are back. Biggest threats in general. This is not just going to be a transfer portal conversation. It's in general. Biggest threats to Ohio State's chances of repeating as national champions. And that can be internal or external, but whatever you think is a threat. That's how we're starting next week's pods, plus plenty of more stuff. Again, we're working on something fun. The greatest Buckeye. We're trying to figure out who the greatest Buckeyes of all time are. And this is not about who the best players are, who's the most successful players. This is about the epitome of what it means to be an Ohio State Buckeye. Who exemplifies that the most? When you think about Ohio State Buckeye, who are the guys that you think of first? And we're using these categories after we get this list of names: accolades and stats, team success, memorable moments, their success or failure against Michigan, and then overall Buckeye order. Right now, that's going around our text description, 614-350-3315. A lot of people have already been mentioned. I'll say this now. There are over 90 people whose names have been brought up. It's been a lot of homework for me. Over 90 people so far, and it's still going. It's been a fun exercise because you remember how many great people have come through the Ohio State program. But the greatest Buckeye, get the text 614-350-3315 if you want to be a part of that. We're getting the list together right now. We're going to put the bracket together, and then we're going to let our texters decide who the greatest Buckeyes are in the history of its 100-plus year long. So get the text 614-350-3315. For Stefan Krajisnik, I am Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.